So I had a question the other day that said, hey, Titus, is Windows bad? And the answer to this is kind of funny. I want to answer this first is it's what we all know. It is a tool that had been developed and used and been a monopoly in the space and dominated all of the PC market from the 90s. And it still has like something like 80% market share. It's falling and it's not as dominant as it once was, but it begs the question, is it bad? But before we get into that, we really need to understand what it does well. And the big thing is most hardware and software is made with Windows in mind. Almost all of it out there is. If you want the maximum compatibility with software and hardware, Windows is pretty much the only game in town because it's been designed that way. It's been a monopoly for decades. And it's just going to continue for a while yet. You know, it's not going to just be a couple years from now that someone else is going to be using stuff, even though that market share is falling. And I think it's in the 70s now with Mac and Linux and Chrome OS and all these other ones starting to rise because of some of the issues Windows has. But it's what we know. I would say any computer person, anybody that worked in IT, you have to know Windows because it's what everyone uses. And a lot of times that's what we grew up on. So it begs the question, why would you use something else that's not Windows? And I go over these things because I really do want to answer it, is it bad? But just to say yes or no doesn't really do that question justice. So why would you choose something other than Windows? And really the first thing that comes to my brain is better security. Windows fundamentally has a lot of different things that have happened to it over the years. But one thing that any security researcher will tell you is Windows is a security nightmare. From the fact it was hacked back in 2017 and an NSA exploit, a backdoor that they used to gain access to Windows system was discovered and openly shared, that spawned massive amounts of ransomware around the entire world from the WannaCry virus and many others. Not just that, but I mean, hey, you can go through the entire Eternal Blue exploits and really do a deep dive into how poor the security is in Windows. And a lot of that is just because of this flawed proprietary design. So security is a big deal where a lot of the NIX systems out there, Linux, Mac OS, they don't have nearly the security flaws that Windows does, especially when it comes to remote execution exploits. And then the second thing is privacy. When it comes to privacy, Windows doesn't have a great track record, and most people know about like its telemetry. And its telemetry by default settings is so egregious that it has a key logger that will literally track every single keystroke you make. It's going to report back all your websites that you visit. It's going to report back your CPU. It's going to report back event metrics, state changes, accessory data, Microsoft Store logs, in-depth system specs, app logs, browser activity logs, enhanced reporting. I mean, I could go on and on about all the telemetry in Windows, but just read up on it if you're curious about privacy in Windows. It's kind of a joke, but at the same time, I've done a lot with like my script and stuff to try and pull back some of that telemetry, but it's kind of something's better than nothing kind of approach, because we can never really kill Microsoft's telemetry because there's just so much of it throughout the entire system. And this even dates all the way back to Windows 7, as that was patched to add a lot of this telemetry in as well. But really, when you get into the modern day person, most people don't care about security and they don't care about privacy. I think just look at social media. It's not really a thing, but I would say the thing that most people care about, and the one reason why I switched off Windows for a lot of my daily driving, was consistency. Windows became very inconsistent, and the Windows 10 rolling updates has been a bit of a gripe, and there's been a lot of bugs. It's probably been the most buggy OS that you can put on any system, just because of the lack of consistency through Windows Update. Now, there's a lot of things you can do, and I usually, in businesses, set like policies in place to where it's not updating every patch Tuesday, but waiting 4 or 5 days to vet those patches and only doing security updates and letting feature updates, postponed for about a year before the feature updates go through, where the security updates are usually postponed only about 4 days. And that's usually my solution to fix the Windows update problem. But I honestly, when it comes to Mac OS or Linux, those update cycles are so much cleaner, so much better, and a lot less problems. So all that doesn't sound that bad. It just sounds like differences. When you look at the technical on its surface, when you look at Windows, Mac, and Linux, they all have their pros and cons, and these are like the pros and cons of Windows. And it doesn't necessarily make it bad by that, but where this really starts to turn, and this is where the bad comes in, is when you look at the hate and the history of Microsoft and the ruthlessness and how they destroyed so many companies and lives just from their anti-competitive practices and how they achieved market dominance. And they still do this to some extent, but let's get into that. So many people have heard of, embrace, extend, and extinguish. And this all came from a U.S. Department of Justice when they were investigating Microsoft for antitrust practices back in the 90s. And this is something that internally Microsoft executives used to basically pull competition in, embrace it. They'd extend it with offering an olive branch to get them on the Windows platform to get that vendor lock-in, and then they'd extinguish it usually by using their own product or competing to their product. They've done this in the browser. They've done it to Netscape, got killed off in the 90s. And it gets even more nefarious than that because they specifically blocked many companies and vendors from being able to work with them and made it so they had to use the Microsoft component. Specifically, Internet Explorer was known for doing this. They did it with Java, any kind of Windows Java thing. They purposely broke the cross-platform capabilities, and they forced all this vendor lock-in. And this is kind of why everyone uses Windows today, because they had to. That was the only thing that could work on all, because Microsoft never really played fair. Microsoft has a huge hold on email, and you can see this through their proprietary MAPI protocol. And they just actually, as of October 1st of 2022, stopped supporting EWS, which is an old version of Exchange Sync, RPS, POP, IMAP, and EAS. They still support some SMTP traffic, but that gets disabled if not used, as they're really trying to force people into the MAPI protocol. And that's in the email side, and this is more for the business email, because in businesses, most people use Exchange Online or O365, and Google has a pretty good hold on other emails. So there's still some competition in this space, but it's something that I really worry about, because between Google and Microsoft, they pretty much own all of our email. And I didn't even go into a lot of the nitty-gritty details of Windows and how, like, the foundation of DOS was actually an iteration of someone else's creation. Quick and Dirty DOS was actually a clone of something from a guy named Gary Kildare. Cold Fusion did an amazing video kind of explaining all that, and Gary Kildare actually ended up killing himself by drinking himself to death, because he could have been the Microsoft, but a lot of that just was something that never happened. And there's so many stories along the way that Microsoft is responsible for, and just the ruthlessness of Bill Gates in the 90s was something of just legend. I mean, wow. So that's why people hate Microsoft. I mean, there's so many missed innovations, companies that were forced to shut down that really, if the market was fair and open, it wouldn't have. And the lives that were destroyed, all to make the Microsoft monopoly.